Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to day 4 of the Asia Regulatory Conference. We have a very engaging and exciting 3 hours ahead, where we will focus on ICH, the foundations of success. I am delighted to be joined today by a group of preeminent speakers, chairs, and panelists who will explore and share their views on the future direction of ICH, efficiency of the organisation, ways of working and training, as well as delving deeper into clinical topics as good examples of ICH piloted harmonisation in Asian countries. We will enrich the discussion today by using Mentimeter polls, so please do share your perspective via these polls when they are issued during the session. As I introduce the speakers today, I will not be providing a detailed biography for each. However, this information is available on the ARC website. I would encourage you to explore the website and take a look at this information. So, next slide, please. So just a few housekeeping points today. All participants will remain muted throughout the session. We would really encourage you to use the Q&A box to raise questions and to engage during the sessions. We will be using Mentimeter polls today to enhance the discussion and to help us prepare for the panels. So please do take the opportunity to respond to these Mentimeter polls. And the ARC conference is being recorded, and the presentations and videos will be made available after the event. So without further delay, I think we will kick off with the first poll. As I mentioned, these polls are being done using Mentimeter, and the first one is visible on your screen now. You can choose to participate in this poll via the QR code on the right-hand side or the link on the left-hand side. Either will work fine. So the first poll today is intended to help inform the panel discussion at the end of the first set of presentations. So we would really like to hear from you about the key factors for ICH success moving forward. And this is a rating type question. So there are a number of options in there. So for example, better process efficiency, more diverse representation in the expert working groups, more effective training and better awareness about training opportunities, better support or advice on the road to membership, greater collaboration with other groups, and helping patient groups indeed to understand ICH. So hopefully people can access the link. There we go, excellent. So we're having some responses there, and we'll just give it a few moments as people have an opportunity to provide their responses. And I can see at the moment we have a lot of responses on more effective training, which we will discuss in much more detail throughout the session. Better support and advice on the road to membership and how ICH works. Also quite a popular answer. Quite a spread here. I can see process efficiency as well and greater collaboration with other groups, for example, WHO, ICMRA, IPORP. Excellent. Thank you very much for everybody responding to the poll. Please keep the responses coming. This type of information is very helpful to inform the panel discussion in a little while. So training really seems to be a very popular response to this poll, coming out as the first factor that people are selecting. Very interesting. We have quite a few responses now. I'll just give folks a few more moments to provide their response. Okay, it seems to be settling down there now. And I can see that at the very top, effective training and awareness about training opportunities appears to be rated the highest, followed by better process efficiency, more support and advice on the road to membership, greater collaboration, and so on. Give it another 10 seconds or so, and then I think perhaps we can, in the interest of time, finish the poll. Very interesting. Thank you so much for all your great engagement with our first poll. Please note that the results of this poll will be brought back up onto the screen when we get to our first panel discussion. Thank you very much. So it is now my great honor to introduce Dr. Nobumasa Nakashima from the Pharmaceuticals and Medical Device Agency, PMDA Japan. Dr. Nakashima will deliver the keynote address today on ICH and where it is headed for in the future. Welcome, and over to you, Dr. Nakashima.
Thank you, Jory, for your kind introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. I am Nobu Nakashima, Associate Executive Director of PMDA. I also played the role of the Vice Chair of the ICH Management Committee. I really appreciate Jory, Judith, and the ARC colleagues to give me these valuable opportunities. Today, I would like to introduce my view regarding the current status of ICH and its future. Next slide, please. At first, I would like to show you some photos. The photo at the left hand introduces our founding fathers and mothers, the regulatory members in 1990 when ICH was established. The photos at the right hand showed the ICH assembly members and MC members in 2019. You can clearly understand how successful ICH has been comparing these photos. Next slide, please. Please start again. Yes, again.
Recording is recording.
Yes, thank you. At first, I would like to show you, there are many ICH achievements today. I would like to pick up 3 achievements. The first achievement is growing membership. ICH was founded as a regional association consisted of 3 countries, regions, Europe, Japan, and US. ICH reform in 2015 opened membership and allowed other countries and international industry associations to participate in ICH. Now, ICH has 20 members and 35 observers. ICH has 31 working groups and directly involves 1,091 persons. I expect that ICH will be a true global organization by welcoming more new members, cooperating with patient associations, academia around the world, and further collaboration with other organizations such as ICMRA and WHO for next 10 years. Next slide, please. The second achievement is increasing the number of guidelines. ICH has published around 70 guidelines on technical requirements. It contains 15 safety guidelines, 24 quality guidelines, 21 efficacy guidelines, and 8 multidisciplinary guidelines. The guidelines are the most important fruits for the ICH. I believe that ICH will continue to make the best effort to increase the number of guidelines or update the existing guidelines. Next slide, please. The third achievement is the spread of MedRat. The common understanding of the medical terms is the basis of all the harmonization activities, including the publication and dissemination of ICH guidelines. Now, ICH has over 6,600 MedRat subscribing organizations in more than 125 countries. This dictionary has 14 language versions and has been updated continuously. Next slide, please. So far, I've introduced three achievements of ICH. However, ICH has also produced plenty of achievements in addition to these three achievements I introduced just right now. I would like to recommend you to read the 30th anniversary publication to know ICH more. Next slide, please. This slide shows my personal views. We tend to think of ICH accomplishments as the development of guidelines, but I believe there are 4 other major accomplishments contributing to the development of systematic pharmaceutical regulation around the world, spreading the awareness that guidelines should be developed based on regulatory science without any involvement in politics or other factors, providing expert opportunities to work hard and encourage their skills each other, building the expert network. Next slide, please. From now on, I would like to introduce my views regarding guideline activities. This slide shows the recent notable achievement in each area and expectations for future from my perspective. First, Q areas. Q12 established a new global common concept of post-approval change management protocol, PACMP. I think this is one of the most important guidelines ICH published recently because it helps the stable supply of the medicines. Taking into the consideration the importance of PACMP, Japan revised the Pharmaceutical and Medical Device Act, which is a basic law regarding the pharmaceutical regulation in Japan, to incorporate this concept. Q13 is the guideline regarding the continuous manufacturing. The stable supply of medicine is one of global issues now. I believe this guideline is one of key tools to cope with these issues. Second, safety guideline, the safety areas. The S1BR1 will improve the efficiency of animal tests. According to the rapporteur of this working group, thanks to this guideline, about a quarter of 2-year rat carcinogenicity study can be omitted. We can save a lot of animals, save the money for the industry, save the resources for regulators, and improve the access to the new medicines for patients. E14S7B is the first application of IPS technology to global pharmaceutical guidelines. In Japan, as we have developed ICH technology as a national policy, I think this guideline will be regarded as a fruit of national effort. Next slide, please. In the interest of time, I have to skip this slide, but as you see, ICH has produced great achievement at both efficacy and multidisciplinary areas as well. Next slide, please. From now on, I would like to introduce ICH recent activities and challenges. First one is collaboration with new stakeholders. As you know, there are some other regulatory bodies in the world. For instance, ICMRA, IPRP, and PICS. ICH has started a collaborative project with them. ICH traditionally worked with the regulators and the industry to develop science-based guidelines. In recent years, stakeholders' involvement, especially patient involvement, has become an issue. Next slide, please. For the collaborative project with other regulatory organizations, I would like to introduce Ikumura ICH PICS IPRP joint reflection paper on PQKMS capability because I participate in this project as a representative for ICH. ICMRA, consisting of heads of regulatory agencies, plays the central role, and the other three bodies, including ICH, join in this project. In order to arrange roles of the activities of these organizations and include the efficiency of their activities, this reflection paper described area of harmonization work for each organization and further considerations and challenges. Next slide, please. For example, according to reflection papers, ICH is in charge of data element and standard. I think this project is a model for future collaboration among these organizations. If this project works well, I think this approach will be also applied to other areas. Next slide, please. Needless to say, for both the regulators and the industry at ICH, patients and their thoughts are quite important. For patient engagement, we continue to discuss how ICH collaborate with patient groups and how patient groups are engaged with ICH. ICH E6EWG mainly discuss this important point. This activity might be a model for ICH activity in the future. Next slide, please. This slide summarizes 4 initiatives to facilitate dissemination of ICH guidelines. Since the ICH reform in 2015, the number of ICH members and observers has been increasing dramatically. In addition to publishing the guidelines, these days, disseminating the ICH guidelines and addressing the training needs for new members and regulated industry is one of the most important activities. Recently, many EWG make the Q&As and the training materials by themselves in addition to the publishing the guidelines. Next slide, please. ICH Management Committee established the ICH training subcommittee to address the increasing needs of training for ICH guidelines. This subcommittee leads many training projects. Yokota-san, JPMA, next speaker, is co-lead of this subcommittee, as he is appropriate person to explain the details of this subcommittee. I skip this slide. Next slide, please. The third initiative is to promote collaboration among experts at the same expert areas. This is a Japanese initiative, and I hope experts will establish a firm network among them. Next slide, please. I would like to raise one approach. IPRP is normally held back-to-back with ICH. It's a kind of a sister organization for ICH. Japan proposed a paper publication promotion project, as this slide shows. In order to strengthen the network of experts, this project recommends experts to publish collaborative works to scientific journals by subsidizing the fee for paper publishing and so on. Next slide, please. One example is IPRP paper on e-labeling. Experts from 8 authorities have collaborated to complete these papers. This paper includes the survey result of 21 authorities, current status of e-labeling at each jurisdiction, benefit of providing electronic product information, and the best practice and the future projections. I hope this effort will contribute to the convergence and harmonization on e-labeling. I also hope the number of this kind of activities among experts will increase as time goes by. Next slide, please. Lastly, I would like to introduce the initiative hosted by PMDA. We established Asian Training Center for Pharmaceuticals and Medical Device Regulatory Authorities. We call it ATC. ATC has contributed to EPIC as centers of excellence as well. There are two types of training. One is that our experts visit other countries and conduct lectures, case studies, and practical training to provide trainings tailored to local needs. The other is that ATC invites regulatory representatives and offers training seminars in Japan. All the costs for both trainings, including the travel and accommodation costs, are covered by MHLW PMDA. Next slide, please. If you see the slide 20, this slide, and 21, next slide, I am sure you can see how much ATC provides the training every year. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide, please. This slide shows ATC planned training course in fiscal 2021. I hope that regulators will join this course to understand the ICH guidelines and implement them at an efficient manner. Next slide, please. As there's a lot of application to join at these trainings, we have no choice but to require a lot of requests due to the space limitation and the shortage of our experts who lead the training courses. In addition, as a target of ATC is just for the regulators, industry colleagues and academia can't attend them, even though there are a lot of requests. In order to improve ATC programs, we have started an e-learning course. We have already provided over 40 content as YouTube programs. We will provide them almost, we will update them almost every month. A long time ago, there was a training course for regulators called CEDAR Forum provided by US FDA. Unfortunately, this program was ended. It was a pity for me because I thought this was the most useful training for the regulator. So I proposed to establish ATC at MHLW around 5 years ago, and the MHLW PMDA started this program. And now I believe that ATC becomes one of the excellent training providers in the world. I hope you will make the best use of these ATC programs. Next slide, last slide, please. I like this phrase very much. Coming together is the beginning, keeping together is progress, working together is success. I strongly hope we all work together to develop the ICH activities for patients. Thank you again for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nakashima, for that excellent presentation. Our next speaker is Dr. Masafumi Yokota from Daiichi Sankyo, representing JPMA. Dr. Masafumi will set the scene for us on ICH and training. Over to you, Dr. Masafumi.
Thank you, Session Chair. I'm honored to be here with this opportunity delivering my talk today. Following Dr. Nakashima's keynote speech, I'll give an overview of ICH training activity. I hope it'll be a good framing for our discussion today. Next slide, please. Thank you. To begin, I want to revisit the purpose of ICH training and the core document that are the basis for the various training activities. ICH has a limited resource to commit. I believe the most valuable resource would be the experts in each ICH working group. The brilliant ICH experts are driving the development of the ICH guideline, and these experts have also produced explanatory slides for Step 4 guideline and training material to support the implementation of the guidelines. There are a variety of ICH training material developed by non-ICH organizations, while I'd like to highlight that these core documents prepared by ICH experts are the core source documents for our training activity. Then ICH has also enhanced our activity to proactively seek input from stakeholders outside ICH during the development of the guidelines under the concept of early engagement and early onboarding from the ICH guideline. As you can imagine, these front-loaded activities have increased the workload for ICH experts. As co-lead of the ICH training subcommittee, I am thinking about utilizing ICH expert resources effectively to ensure sustainable, cost-effective training activities. I want to share with you that sustainability and effectiveness of training will be an important factor for the future of ICH training. Next slide, please. As Dr. Nakashima touched on briefly in his presentation, as ICH expands and ICH guideline becomes more complex, the need for ICH training is increasing, and we are enhancing various initiatives. This slide shows an overview of ICH training initiative. Regarding the enrichment public meeting, in addition to holding briefing session at Step 2, Step 4 in major ICH region to increase stakeholders' early involvement outside ICH, ICH has recently provided briefing session to seek feedback before reaching Step 2, where the technical documents are still under development. Regarding diversified training tool, recently ICH has been creating introductory videos on the ICH guideline. Case studies summarizing actual ICH guideline use case are also helpful. Also, it's planned to go live this week. ICH has refreshed the ICH training website with a new functionality of ICH training library, which makes browsing all relevant training materials in one centralized location easier. The light blue area in the center of the slide is a relatively new initiative called ICH Training Associates, which is outsourced training development to non-profit organizations selected by ICH. ICH has released an overview video on the ICH website for Q1 series guideline developed by Northeastern University, and we are finalizing a comprehensive online training module for Q1, which will soon be available free of charge on ICH website. At the recent ICH ASSE meeting, a contract with 3 new ICH training associates were approved, and ICH has been under the final contracting process and began developing online training accordingly. We will accelerate online training development. The ICH regulatory training at the bottom is an initiative that provides ICH funding for training organized by ICH regulators. Applications are annually received from ICH regulator, and the ICH management committee review and approve the funding. Next slide, please. I will touch on global public meeting for EC6R3 held in May last year, as an example of enrichment public meeting. At that time, this guideline was Step 1, but global public meeting was held in the virtual format to explain the draft technical document and to seek feedback proactively from stakeholders outside ICH. At this global public meeting, we actively listened to the voices of the wide range of stakeholders, including patient organizations and academia, in addition to industry stakeholders. I believe that in the future, this type of public meeting would be more needed for proactive early engagement and onboarding during the guideline development process. Next slide, please. Also, I want to touch on the introductory guideline video. an example of diversified ICH training tool. As more guidelines introduce new concepts, ICH has created introductory videos for those guidelines so that the wide range of stakeholders, other than experts, can understand the key concept of the guideline in plain words. Here is an example from E17, which is a YouTube video posted on the ICH website to provide an easy to understand introductory digest for light users. Next slide, please. In this slide, I'd like to explain a bit more about the acceleration of online training development, leveraging ICH Training Associates. The aspirational goal for ICH is clear: to provide consistent ICH guideline training that can be accessed from anywhere in the world. ICH aims to eventually offer online training for all ICH guidelines. The ICH Training Associates are the enabler for us. As you are aware, the ICH guidelines are categorized into 3 layers based on our priority: Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. We are prioritizing development of 2 types of online training: basic training and in-depth training for the 3 Tier 1 guidelines, which are requirements for ICH membership, and the 5 Tier 2 guidelines, which are important for eligibility for applying for elected management committee member. Among the 8 target Tier 1, Tier 2 guidelines, ICH is currently developing training for 6 of the guidelines shown here. As for Tier 3, we have over 60 guidelines as of today, which ICH has identified guidelines with the highest training needs, and ICH will prioritize them for online training development. Currently, we have begun developing training for the guideline listed here. Next slide, please. The ICH Training Subcommittee is facilitating the various training initiatives, but considering the environment changes that have become more evident over the past few years, we will need to set more focused priorities and would concentrate on achieving tangible results over the next few years. As you can see on the left side, in addition to expansion of ICH region and countries, ICH guidelines complexity has increased due to the recent topic trends, and the diversity of ICH stakeholders has also become more enhanced. To proactively adapt to these environmental changes, ICH will need to further accelerate the development of online training with a spirit of agility. I believe it will be important to further expand ICH Training Associates, factoring into their expertise and global distribution. ICH will also need to make ICH Training website more user-friendly global portal. Since online training will be the main focus, it will be important to seek synergy with ICH Global Total. To address expansion of ICH region and country, outreach activity related to ICH training would need to be enhanced as well. Product collaboration with a relevant stakeholder in the training arena will also be important to further plan, deliver training on the ICH guideline efficiently and effectively. IFPMA, the organizer of today's ARC, will be an important key player, I think. Next slide, please. I have been highlighting a global approach with online training for ICH guideline, but I'd like to talk about how tailored training based on practical needs of each region country, rather than one-fit-all global training, would be ultimately essential for the implementation of globally harmonized ICH guidelines. Here is a conceptual illustration of how the implementation capability of ICH guideline would be diversified across ICH region and countries. Since online training developed by ICH primarily designed with the assumption that a certain level of implementation capability has been reached, I believe that it may not be possible to meet the needs of all ICH country and region through online training alone. As shown in the chart, countries with high capability may need advanced training, while countries with lower capability may need supplemental training to bring them up to the average level. Next slide, please. Thank you. I believe that the key to providing tailored training in each country region is industry training support at the local level. This is an example of JPMA. To support the implementation of ICH guideline, JPMA works closely with MHRA PMDA to provide local training tailored to the Japan needs, in addition to the training provided by ICH. As a training support platform, specific task force have been established in relevant JPMA committee to support adequate implementation and adherence to the ICH guideline. In addition, to support individual companies that are particularly not prepared to implement the ICH guideline and to raise the baseline capability of JPMA member company, as well as the medical community in Japan, JPMA works closely with MHRA PMDA to develop and provide practical handbook, such as E2B handbook for various local stakeholders. Ongoing dialogue with the regulator is also important. In Japan, formal dialogue between MHRA PMDA and JPMA is regularly held to identify issues in implementing the ICH guideline and facilitate issue solving. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. ICH is expected to expand further. The number of ICH member observer would increase, and the ICH technical issue would continue to become complex and diversifying. So we will need to further evolve ICH training. First, we will need to make the most effective use of ICH limited resource and provide a globally unified training platform. Specifically, it is important to accelerate the development of online training that is equally accessible to all ICH stakeholders and to increase the scalability of ICH training across the globe. In addition, the ICH training website will be further improved to serve as a global training portal. Also, outreach activity related to ICH training should be enhanced. In particular, we will need to consider how we can implement proactive outreach to new ICH members and observers. And finally, we will facilitate training activity at the regional and local level to complement the ICH global efforts. In reality, the training provided by ICH alone cannot complete our training efforts to cover all implementation support. Local training activity relevant to the practical situation will be essential just because we aim for global harmonization. To this end, cross collaboration between the regulator and the industry in each region country is a key. I should stop here. I hope my presentation will be informative for your discussion for today's conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Masafumi. That perspective on ICH training was excellent and very valuable. And I think we can see from our polling results that this topic is extremely important to all stakeholders in ICH. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So I would now like to introduce our next speaker, and it is a great honor to introduce Dr. Jiwon Young from the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety, MFDS Korea. Dr. Young will speak to us about the road to ICH membership. Over to you, Dr. Jiwon.
Thank you very much, Julie. It was a kind introduction. Good morning and good afternoon to you all. My name is Jiwon Jung from MFDS Korea, and I feel privileged to introduce how Korea MFDS has successfully landed on the ICH as a member country. Next slide, please. This is where we are now. The first slide is to show you where MFDS is now. We are in the position of regulatory member among 20 members. And maybe the organizers want me to share our experiences, how to get there. Next slide, please. MFDS is also elected member of management committee. MC oversees administrative and financial matters and oversight of working groups on behalf of all members. Next slide, please. Here is the milestones for how MFDS participate to as a member of ICH. So we begin to encounter the ICH in May 2007. We participated as a deputy representative of APAC. And in the next year, we participated as a drug regulatory authority because ICH had opened the door to many regulatory authorities. And then 2011, we joined as an expert working group. So we were keen to work as many activities as possible from that time. So in 2016, we became a regulatory member at last. And then in 18, we elected as a member of management committee. So in the end, in 2022, this year in November, the ICH assembly is going to be held in Songdo, Korea. It's next month. Next slide, please. I would like to expand a little bit further about our activity on expert working groups. To contribute to ICH, MFDS is doing its duty by actively involving in expert working group to develop, revise, and to implement ongoing many guidelines. Currently, 34 expert working groups and implementation working groups are active in the ICH level. And among them, MFDS is participating in 18 working groups. And mostly the subjects are quality part and the multidisciplinary part. Next slide, please. To become a regulatory member, a country needs to implement ICH guidelines. Here's how MFDS implemented them. All of you already fully understand how ICH implementation of its guideline is going on from step 1 to step 5. The process of MFDS implementation usually begins at step 3 or step 4 of the ICH guideline development. So if you look at the MFDS process, maybe in the, for example, during the step 3, if Korea needs to adopt this ICH guideline, we translate the guideline first, and then we are going to set up some drafting team with MFDS reviewers and industry experts to discuss whether it is going to be okay or not about the adaptation of ICH guideline into Korea guidelines. So it's quite an extensive process, and extensive discussion is going to be going on. And once we decide to implement the ICH guideline as a Korean guidelines, then the process is general. After process is the same as a general guideline implementation process. The only difference is after implementation of ICH guideline, we report to ICH-MC. Next slide, please. So this implementation activity was not happened just one day. MFDS made a tremendous efforts to implement the ICH guideline for more than 20 years. So I counted it as it begins in 1999. And after started to participate in ICH guideline, you can see the many guidelines are implemented, and it speed up annually. So if you look at the mark that MFDS to join the expert working group in 2011, the increase is quite steep. And it was 2016 that MFDS became the ICH member. We report to ICH-MC that the core guidelines are implemented, but the principle and these core guidelines are already implemented or followed or adopted by the as a Korean guidelines. And after that, other mandatory guidelines are all implemented by the 2020. Next slide, please. So currently, 93% of ICH guidelines are implemented in MFDS. 5% are in the process of implementation. 2% are yet to be implemented. Next slide, please. If you wonder the details of status that what subjects are implemented, quality guidelines are almost 100% implemented, but the efficacy guidelines are some left to go. Next slide, please. This is a screenshot of our NIFDS website. For transparency and communication, MFDS is posting our activities in ICH implementation status of ICH guidelines in our website. The information we provide to public is ICH activities, ICH guideline with the Korean and English version, and ICH updated status, and the MFDS activity as an expert working group. Next slide, please. Then how MFDS interact with the Korean pharmaceutical industry to spread the information on ICH activities. We have two channels. One is ICH Regulator District Cluster. The second one is ICH Training Program. Next slide, please. The ICH cluster initiated from 2017. It consists of 4 clusters: quality, efficacy, safety, and multidisciplinary as a subject of ICH guidelines. And the members are regulators, MFDS regulators, and the industry experts and academic experts. The purpose of the cluster is to discuss the ICH guideline issues when we develop or when we adopt the ICH guideline into Korean guidelines, and to develop the ICH training program agenda. And if the cluster decide to develop the ICH training program agenda, we started to run the ICH training program from 2018. The ICH training program is a 4-day program. It convened annual basis, and the agenda is all ICH guidelines that were proposed by the Korean stakeholders. The program agenda is decided by the ICH training clusters. So, for example, I would like to share our experiences on 2020 last year outcomes. It was an online training program. So the 2,000 participants were involved, and with the 23 lecturers. And people said it was quite satisfied. So the rate of satisfaction was 88%. Next slide, please. So MFDS understand the significance of international cooperation with the ICH very much. So we are very keen to cooperate with ICH members. And these activities and these efforts were going on very well. Thank you very much. Next slide. So that was my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jung. I think that was a really good insight into the work that the national regulatory authorities are doing on ICH, and we really appreciate you giving us this presentation today. I can see that there are questions coming into the Q&A, so I would just encourage all participants to engage, use this opportunity to ask questions through the Q&A, and there are lots of answers being provided in the Q&A also. So our next speaker today is Xiaoti Liu from the China Pharmaceutical Innovation and Research Development Association. Xiaoti will provide us with a presentation on the role of industry in working with NRAs to implement ICH and the experience of experts. Over to you, Xiaoti.
Thank you, Julie. Hello, everyone. I'm Xiaoti Liu from FIRDA. I'm very happy to be invited to the Asia Regulatory Conference. And today I will talk about the experience of FIRDA in participating in the AFPMA SH working group. I will introduce from 4 parts and how can we participate and what is FIRDA and how we recruit candidate experts and the impact of industry after joining SH. Next slide, please. And firstly, I would like to introduce how we get involved and its importance. In 2017, China's former CFDA became the SH regulatory member and was elected as SH Management Committee member in 2018 and 2021, and which further facilitates the drug review and approval system in line with international standard. At the same period, FIRDA joined IPMA in 2016 and became the only associate member represents China's domestic enterprises in IPMA. And through communication and coordination with NMPA and IFFPMA, FIRDA was involved deeply in China's drug regulatory policy reform and SH-related work, and has been promoting the transformation and implementation of SH guidelines in China from industry perspectives. Up to May this year, the NMPA announced that 59 of 63 SH guidelines was timelined, and 55 guidelines was fully implemented. The conversion rate reaches 93%. Next slide, please. National Trade Association could participate in EWGs. That's because IPMA plays an important role in industry participation in ICH. Before Montreal SH Assembly on mid of the 2017, industry experts from non-represented SH regions have not had the possibility to participate at the EWG level. At that year, the Assembly endorsed IPMA suggestions. IPMA as a standing observer could have a seat to be filled on each of the current EWGs, which will be offered to IPMA national trade associations. This is a very important move for the industry. IPMA as a standing observer and secretary of SH actively participate in all SH-related work, and all those work above can ultimately facilitate the implementation of ICH guidelines at the national level. Next slide, please. Since joining in the IPMA, next slide, please. Thank you. Since joining in the IPMA and FIRDA positively participate in IPMA's many activities. As of August 2, 2022, FIRDA recommended 43 experts to 22 IPMA SH task forces, account for 53 of all experts in IPMA, and experts from innovative pharmaceutical companies accounted for 81%. Next slide, please. And why FIRDA could recommend so many experts? This probably because the unique member competition and the years of research in pharmaceutical policies. FIRDA is an industry association focused on promoting the innovative development of pharmaceutical industry and centers on the principle of innovation, industrialization, and internationalization. FURDA currently has 181 members, mainly consists of China's best pharmaceutical R&D enterprises, research institutions, clinical institutions, R&D service companies, and investment institutions, focusing on pharmaceutical innovation and covering the whole industrial chain. Aims to considering and optimizing the China's pharmaceutical innovation policy environment for an overall perspective. Next slide, please. And further maintain a close contact with embassies, international organizations, pharmaceutical industry associations at home and abroad, as well as multinational companies, and deeply involved in international events. Next slide, please. And especially, FURDA has been working on policy research for a very long time and deeply participate in the reform of pharmaceutical policies and healthcare ecosystem in China, and focusing on many aspects, such as drug review and approval, clinical inspection, intellectual property protection, drug reimbursement policies, etc. And more than 50 feedbacks and suggestions were submitted to relevant government agencies. Next slide, please. As a strong support of NMPA, FURDA has close cooperation on promoting the implementation of ICH guidelines in China. FURDA recommended a total of 283 experts in 32 CDE ICH working groups, and we had provided comments and suggestions on guidelines translation, revision, and implementation opinions on 59 guidelines, and organized and participated over 20 ICH trainings and seminars. And in order to better implement the Tier 3 guidelines, FURDA established a working group, organized 92 representatives and from industry and clinical institutes to finalize a report for CDE to give them a clear roadmap and suggestion on each Tier 3 guideline. And what's more, we organized pharmaceutical companies to online test the eCTD system of NMPA, help to optimize the system. So we built a platform between industry and government to promote the localization and implementation of ICH in China. Next slide, please. All those work relies on FURDA's rich expert resources. We have 14 special committees composed of leading experts from clinical, academic, industrial, and investment areas, and covers from early stage drug R&D and clinical research to policy and investment, as well as digitalization and medical devices, which gives full support to FURDA's work. Next slide, please. As we can see, FURDA recommended expert accounted for the highest proportion over the past 6 years. That's because we have a strict requirements and high membership participation. Regarding the selection of IPMA task force candidates, we have elaborately selected domestic seasoned senior experts with years of practical experience in relevant fields. On one hand, FURDA pay high attention to expert nomination, and our members respond positively every time. On the other hand, we have a very clear and specific requirements to recruit candidates, such as you should have more than 10 years experience on related specialty, and you should be an expert in a certain field and familiar with ICH guideline and China regulatory policies. Last but not least, you have to fluent in English, and overseas working experience is preferred, which could help you to find the most suitable person. And depends on our leading member companies and rich expert tank, we can have more flexibility by proactively inviting and recommending target experts. Next slide, please. In addition, FURDA established normalized expert communication mechanism and keep close contact with experts and track task forces work in progress. We regularly organize ICH expert sharing seminar for experts and members and share the latest regulatory trainings and policies. And through various activities, it can raise members' awareness. So every time the members' recommendation is very positive. And meanwhile, we keep in close touch with the regulatory agency on EWG's progress and exchange views. Next slide, please. Another reason is that the experts we recommended have extremely high professional literacy and rich international experience. Besides, all of them are very responsible, even though they are very busy as a company executive and clinical expert, but still willing to make all-out effort in SH-related work and devoting extra time to the work on the SH. But we also found some problems in the process. Experts change jobs frequently, which brings us a great challenge and extra work to re-recruit, for which we have developed a management process. And besides, a kickoff meeting and preparatory meeting is very necessary to help experts understand their work and their responsibilities. Next slide, please. As China regulatory agency joined the SH, the level of China's drug regulatory and R&D capabilities developed rapidly and gradually harmonized with international standards. Looking back over the past few years, the number of China's R&D pipelines has reached nearly 40% of the world's total number by 2020, and retaining firmly in top of the world's second tier. As of the number of first-to-market new drugs globally, China ranks in the top 3 among 12 major benchmarking countries, accounting for 6% of the total numbers. As we can see that China's pharmaceutical innovation capacity is constantly improving. Next slide, please. With the implementation of SHE17, the engagement of MRCT in China is increasing each year. An increasing number of MRCT studies are initiated by China innovative pharmaceutical companies, and China's clinical standards is gradually gaining more international recognition. Next slide, please. In the process of industrial reconstruction and drug regulatory reform, the innovation capacity of local innovative companies is improving, and the number of China's independent developed NDAs approved by NMPA is increasing year by year. And moreover, many of the drugs are developed and registered both in China and the US. Next slide, please. As China innovation capability is gaining world recognition, and in the past 7 years, the number of licensing in and license out projects in China show an increasing trend, and China is engaging in more global pharmaceutical deals. These are the development of China's drug regulatory reform after joining SAH. Next slide, please. In the future, we hope to further play the role and advantages of industry association and continue to promote SH localization and transformation and engage in more SH-related work. We hope to work with more national trade associations as well. As an association, we would like to keep strengthened contacts with regulatory agencies and international organizations to expand cooperations. And what's more, we are willing to work with regulatory agency and SH training subcommittee to carry out more SH training activities. And HOPE has more opportunity to introduce China's pharmaceutical development and improve mutual understanding. Since China and NMPA joined the SH for 5 years, we are also very looking forward to the SH assembly being held in China, and further is willing to help organize this event if needed. Next slide, please. That's my report for today, and I would like to thank for IPMA to organize this conference and efforts in SH, and thank you for all experts participating in the SH working group, and thank you very much for your time, and please feel free to reach out for me, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Xiaoti. That was really interesting to get the perspective from industry from a China point of view. So I would now like to hand over to Judith MacDonald from Pfizer and representing IFPMA. Judith is going to chair the panel discussion on the areas that were discussed this morning already. Over to you, Judith.
Thank you, Julie. And I think we've had a very rich set of presentations this morning, and the Q&A has been very, very lively. So I think we can look forward to a really interesting and engaging discussion over the next 30 minutes. So I'll be your moderator, and I'm delighted to welcome back Dr. Nakashima, who was our keynote speaker this morning. And there were so many issues and great points in his talk, and we're hoping to pick up on some of those in the next few minutes. I'm also joined by my fellow collaborator from IFPMA, Isabelle Coumand-Pollard. She works at Merck in regulatory affairs and science policy, but she is also one of our representatives from IFPMA on the ICH training subcommittee. And given the interest that we've had in training matters, we heard from Masa this morning and a lot of questions in the Q&A. I think it'd be great to have Isabelle with us. And then finally, we have Dr. Sarah Wang, who is Head of Science and Regulatory Affairs at the RDPAC Trade Association. So she's able to give us the industry perspective there from China. So without further ado, let's kick us off. And I'd like us to return to the poll results that we had this morning. So if we could start to display the next slide. And I think this is interesting because some of these themes came through in the chat this morning. You know, we had sort of themes around resourcing to be able to join ICH, how to start, how to get going, the training, points on the interpretation of guidance and the role of other groups. And I think this polling question that we have here is somewhat like trying to ask people to, a parent to choose between their children. So all of these points seem to be really important. I mean, we do have the top point there is really about training. And then the second one there is about process efficiency for ICH. And then the third one, the greater support and advice on the road to membership. But I think we shouldn't lose sight of the bottom three there, the interest in involving patients, representation on the working groups and working with other groups. So to start off, I'd like to address my first question to Dr. Nakashima, if I can. And ICH can look a little bit complicated to those on the outside, and it can be difficult to know where to start on the journey to ICH membership. So given your experience and in your role as ICH Management Committee Vice Chair, what advice would you give to another Asian regulator on how to plan a roadmap to ICH membership? I think you're on mute, Dr. Nakashima.
I'm sorry. Thank you. So thank you very much for your excellent questions. The most important purpose of ICH is to harmonize the guidelines among members. I think the effective approach to promote the harmonization is to increase the number of the members. To become the ICH members, candidates take the stepwise approach. That is Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Tier 1 guidelines are basic guidelines, and only 3, Q1, Q7, and E6. I want to recommend the candidate to focus on implementing these Tier 1 guidelines. Since ICH reform in 2015, 9 regulatory authorities have joined. Some took time to prepare for the membership fee, and others took time to prepare for human resources to cope with expert working groups. So I also recommend the candidate to make a plan to prepare for the necessary resources as much as possible. That's my answer.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. And I think to focus on the tier 1 guidance initially is less overwhelming than trying to think about the whole of ICH. So thank you for that. And once also in your keynote address this earlier today, you mentioned a few areas where ICH is heading now. One of which is how to make patients more aware of the benefits to them. And could you share more about what ICH is thinking of doing to help patients understand the value of its work?
Yes. Thank you for your question. Major ICH members have already started to incorporate the opinions from patient groups into their regulatory activities in each country. I think it is natural as a next step. Many members think patient voices should be incorporated into the global forum, such as ICH. I recognize that ICH E6R3, the guideline EWG for GCP, become a model case or a pilot case to collaborate with patient groups. This kind of joint work helps patients to understand value of ICH activities. ICH MC also thinks other approaches to talk with patient group. I hope ICH can introduce a new project in the near future.
Thank you. And I think it's great that ICH E6R3 is paving the way there, and we're looking forward to seeing more of that model being replicated. You also talked about collaboration with other groups, and we saw in the chat, and thank you for addressing a lot of the points in the chat and the questions already, but there's interest in ICH collaborating with other groups, ICMRA, WHO. Can you expand a bit more on the opportunities that can provide, rather than ICH just working with industry as in the past?
I think that is at the keynote speech, I explained about joint reflection paper among ICMRA, ICH, IPRP, and PICS. This is a new style of collaboration among these organizations. Each organization has its role, and these activities should be linked closely to increase efficiency and reduce the duplication and redundancies. As a new style of the collaboration, ICMRA shows strategic approaches. IPRP conducts a survey and makes a point to consider and guidance. ICH and PICS makes concrete guidelines. That's my idea.
Thank you. So I think it's complementary work and avoiding duplication there, which is really key. So let's now turn to the industry colleagues and get an industry perspective. So starting, Sarah, with you, what do you think about how we can get more industry reps from Asia onto the expert working groups, and why do you think that this is important?
Thanks, Judith. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. So I think first of all, I think I would like to, on behalf of RDPAC, I would like to thank IPF for your leadership from the industry contribution to ICH. So as a member company of IMPMA, so RDPAC has taken a lot of efforts in China to support ICH. I do think it is very important to have more industry representatives from Asia to reflect the needs from this region. And I think in China, every time when RDPAC receive the notice from IPMA for ICH new topics, will pass to the relevant RDPAC working group. In fact, in my function, I'm from the science and regulatory function. I've moved over the 30 task force and working groups. So we'll pass to relevant working groups for the nomination. And in the same time, under leadership of NMPA, so the Center of Drug Evaluation, we named the CDE in China, they also set up the Chinese expert working group to support different ICH topics. So in the past 6 months, RDPAC has recommended 18 experts to CDE for about 5 ICH new topics. And just like Xiaoqi just mentioned in her presentation, you can see that NMPA joined ICH in 2017. So I think besides the new ICH topic, the ICH guideline implementation is also very important in China. And RDPAC, we have 45 member companies, which are all the multinational pharmaceutical companies. And our member companies have built up 47 plants and 25 R&D centers in China, and with about 1.7 billion US dollar R&D investment in China every year. So the Chinese colleagues from our member company, they have more understanding of the Chinese regulations and the situation here. And in the same time, they could leverage the knowledge and resources from the headquarters to better support the ICH implementation in China. So we have recommended many speakers and trainers to support NMPA for the ICH training, not only for the industry, but also for the regulators. And we also provided the proposal of ICH implementation in China to the health authorities, and also share the international practice with them. And every time when we have the ICH guideline translation into Chinese, NMPA always come to RDPAC to ask us to do the verification. So we have done really a lot of verification for the Chinese translation of all the ICH guidelines. Yeah, thanks, Judith.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I think that it sounds like RDPAC is very well positioned there, because you not only have the national perspective there in China of the practicalities of introducing the ICH guidelines, but also the perspective from some of the multinational companies. And I think sometimes it can be aligning those perspectives is where you're playing that sort of key role. And I just congratulate you for all of the progress and all of the work there in supporting IFPMA in populating the working groups. So I hope to continue that further. So Isabel, I would like to bring you in here. And we heard from Xiaoqi this morning as well about how IFPMA works with the trade associations. But I wondered if you could unpack a little bit more about how this works, how IFPMA links with the other groups in Asia, industry groups, to encourage them to volunteer, and how that works on a practical basis when a new guideline is being developed. Could you explore that a bit more for us?
Sure. So thank you very much, Judith, for the invitation, as well as Janice from the IFPMA Secretariat. I must say that we are a solid team here. We have an ICH task force in IFPMA to work and to try our best to support training activities, as well as ICH MC and activities. Also, I would like to acknowledge first that we can really acknowledge the growing number of representatives from Asian countries in EWGs. I calculated when I prepared this session yesterday night, and there were around 40% of the total number of experts coming from Asia. So this is big. And we can see also through Sarah and the presentation from other presenters, there is really a lot of engagements and more diversity, with around 29% of new members, so non-standing, non-founding regulatory members representations. And this is in the ICH anniversary report, an annual report. So, and through our model in IFPMA, I think that we have ICH focal points in local national trade association. That is a very nice outreach then, that we can raise interests in volunteering relevant experts as early as possible when there are calls for expression of interest to join some new working groups kicking off. And we can also leverage, in fact, the relationship we have with those local national trade association to discuss and point out to the right direction where the training needs are, and also what kind of training, if it's basic or advanced training. So has to have more tailored approach. And I very much liked the slide from Masafumi-san around this tailored approach and the need for having a very close collaboration between industry and regulators, and having also training activities tailored at regional and local level. And I think that IFPMA is very well placed with its connections with I think more than 50 associations worldwide to get these connections and get the outreach for leveraging, in fact, and being more directed to the right training offers.
Thank you, Isabel. I think that that's a really comprehensive answer. So thank you for highlighting the key points there. So Sarah, turning back to you, and I saw some themes come through in the Q&A on this around sort of interpretation of ICH guidelines, but also a problem that we hear quite a lot, or a challenge, I should say, is with ICH guideline adherence, is there are some conflicting national guidelines. And can you comment on how much of a challenge that is for you in China and potential ways to overcome that?
Yeah, thanks, Judith. I think you probably know that there are over 6,000 pharmaceutical companies in China. So that is a really huge amount. And I think Drive ICH in China is really a huge project for NMPA. I think NMPA has made really great effort on the ICH implementation in China, and also actively participate in all the ICH new topics. And according to the ICH China office, right now China has adopted and implemented all the ICH guidelines. And among them, there are 57 ICH guidelines issued before NMPA joining ICH. And except for ICH Q4 and Q6B, partially implemented. The other part will be gradually implemented in the future with the revision of the Chinese Pharmacopoeia. And China has fully adopted and implemented all the ICH guidelines. And so far, if you visit the CDE website, you can find until now that CDE has released about 400 technical guidelines in China. And CDE right now is in the process comparing the Chinese guidelines with the ICH guidelines, and also the guidelines from the FDA, from EVA and PMDA. So CDE has adopted the proactively approach to connect with the industries, including RDPAC, to collect the feedback and suggestions of how to close the gap. And these actions are really highly appreciated and recognized by the industry. And I personally think the gaps between the national and international standard might be a common issue in the country all over the world, and do appreciate the China Health Authority's efforts to close the gap. And from the industry association point of view, of course, RDPAC, we also proactively share our suggestions to NMPA and CDE from time to time, and also support them to close the gap. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you're right. I think this must be a common issue in a number of countries. And I think it's interesting to hear how you're tackling that in China, because I'm sure that some of those principles can then be applied in the other countries to identify what these gaps are. Because I think part of this is actually understanding what the gaps are, because if you don't know where the gaps are, you can't then address those points. So, okay, let's turn back to you, Isabel. And you know that training came up in the poll as our number one area that ICH it needs to focus on. And we know that there is a report that the Management Committee commissioned CIRS to look at adherence, and has been doing that for some years now. And this is actually publicly on the website. People can see those reports to see how the adherence and the implementation is going with the different members. And I was wondering if you could share some thoughts on what these reports are showing us and how we then bring what that's showing us into the training offerings that ICH is doing to increase the adherence.
Yeah, thank you, Judith. In fact, first, I think this is great that this poll shows that training is a cornerstone and is very important. And I think that I'm very thrilled and engaged that we have a mission there, I think, to help and support everybody in having access to those training and then relay and cascade those training in their respective countries for more patient access. So, and also I think that the monitoring of the progress of the international harmonization and the coordination of the implementation efforts is a very important focus for ICH, both from the ICH Management Committee and the ICH Training Subcommittee for sure. And maybe I can shed some light on this CIRS survey because maybe not everybody knows what it was. And I will provide the link maybe in the panel also so that people can access to the full reports. There was a survey that was launched by ICH with the partnership with CIRS. CIRS is the Center of Innovation for Regulatory Science. And it was done in 2019 and then second time in 2020. And there was a questionnaire both from industry and regulatory members focusing on assessing the implementation and adherence to ICH guidelines by some non-funding regulatory members, so new regulatory members, 6 of them, including China, Korea, Singapore, and Taiwan, for Tier 2 and Tier 3 guidelines, and then also engaging observers for Tier 1 guidelines implementation. And a first report has been published in September 2021, and I will put the link, indicating an increase in implementation and adherence across most of the Tier 2 guidelines compared to 2019. And with overall 70% of total guidelines being implemented. So first, a good improvement. Second, the report also as well as another section, which is the subsequent analysis of the free text comments that was published last June. And here it gives a wealth of valuable information to direct us and in IFPMA and also in the ICH Training Subcommittee, possibly towards guidelines where training offerings might be most needed. Because it also highlights the underlying reasons why a guideline has not been fully implemented and adhered to. And this can be classified into 4 categories. For example, because the legal framework does not allow full implementation, or there is a different interpretation by regulators, or there are local regional guidelines preventing full adherence, or there are additional requirements beyond the ICH expectations. And we have, with these reports, very high granularity into the understanding of the reasons why the guidelines are not fully adhered to or how they could be improved in terms of adherence. And I think that this can definitely better inform training needs and issues to be solved for further convergence.
Yeah, thank you, Isabel. So this should enable us to target the training.
Thanks.
I think part of the challenge for the ICH Training Subcommittee is we're offering sort of more general training. So there's this need to get everybody up to, which Massa talked about this morning, about the sort of acceptable level, and then there are the aspects where other health authorities need to go further and deeper, so that it's not like a one size fits all, really. So I was just wondering about your thoughts about how we get that balance between that general training level that everybody needs to get to and targeting the areas that need to be focused on for different countries.
So it's for me, Judith, again.
Yes, for you, yes.
Okay, so I think that again, I think we are very open for countries to give feedback on what are their exact needs, and we are very well positioned again with our local national trade associations, and that's where we can really make the balance between having general basic understanding, like when it's published at step 4, there is this basic understanding for each ICH guideline, and then having case studies, more advanced training, and then having more tailored training offerings through either expression of interest from regulatory members or from us in IFPMA through listening to our memberships in order to direct to more tailored offers and really bring back this feedback to the ICH training subcommittee to orientate and prioritize the needs according to what we are hearing. So I think that here we are like a sounding board, I would say, from the local national trade associations, and the more feedback we receive, the more our work can be efficient and focused.
Yeah. And do you think there's anything further we can do, Isabel, to meet the needs of our Asian industry experts specifically?
So we can have this reducing misinterpretation, I think. We heard about Sarah Wong about their connection with regulators. I think also we heard about this connection from MFDS with the industry cluster. We heard also from Masafumi-san that a close collaboration with industry and regulators is essential. So I think that working together in close collaboration is extremely important and fruitful to address those training needs at both global and regional levels, and also to reduce further misinterpretation by doing some gap assessments, by doing workshops with stakeholders, and also maybe by also raising awareness on ICH guidelines as early as possible. So as in very early stages, so not only waiting step 4, but also at step 2 to engage stakeholders into conversation to ensure this misinterpretation can be avoided first front, and to streamline the development of the guidelines. As for E6, as was mentioned by Nakashima-san. So yes, I think that we have a lot of through our outreach activities, we have a lot of possibilities to streamline ICH development and further ICH training.
Yes, thank you, Isabel. I think you made a really interesting key point there about awareness of the new guidance as it's coming through, the draft guidance, because it's like a pipeline. And if we wait until step 4 before we are making people aware of the content of that guideline, then it's much more difficult. So it's the balance of the guideline when they're still draft, they're not yet final, but I think raising awareness of what's coming is going to be really key for the future. So thank you for that. I think just looking at some of the themes, the questions that were coming through in the Q&A, there was quite a lot of interest in the ATC, Dr. Nakashima, and I was fascinated to learn in your keynote address this morning that you have those trainings on YouTube. And so that now not only the regulators, but also the industry colleagues can access those. I think that is absolutely fantastic. I just wondered if you could just take a few moments, given the interest we've had in the chat on this, if you know, to talk a little bit about the ATC. Just maybe how people can access that, Dr. Nakashima-san.
Yes, so it's easy for you to find the link at PMDA homepage. And yes, so I'm going to send the link to the participant after the meetings. So yes, if you want. Yes.
Thank you so much.
So PMDA has an English homepage. And if you go to the English homepage, then you can find our ATC programs. Yes.
Fantastic. And also, Dr. Nakashima, as we look to the future with ICH, one challenge that I see is that in some areas, the pace of the scientific progress is very rapid, and it takes a long time, on the other hand, to produce an ICH guideline. And this can be quite slow, the guideline, the harmonization process. So how do we handle that? What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you for your additional questions. I personally think that this is the most challenging issue for the ICH. In fact, some agencies hesitate to make ICH guidelines for this kind of areas because scientific progress in some areas, such as advanced products, is so fast. I think one approach for this program is to make a high-level guideline. After making the first version of the guideline, high-level guidelines, it is revised based on the accumulated evidence and information continuously. However, as this approach is resource-intensive, the only important topics should be targeted. Another approach is to ask other organizations to respond to this kind of activities. For example, to cope with the COVID situation, ICMRA has made various symposiums and found basic common understandings and approaches. One country made the first guidelines, and the others followed it, made their guidelines, which is almost the same with the one made at first. I think this kind of approach might be realistic and efficient, but as I mentioned, this is very challenging for the ICH. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those points. I wonder, Sarah, whether you could give your opinion on this challenge.
Yeah, sure. So I think harmonization is always not easy. And yeah, for manufacturing regulation, what is the technical standard? And in general, the standard of the regulation is always coming after and behind the scientific progress. So I think if the pace of the scientific progress in some areas is really fast, and I think they could go ahead as a pilot to sort of set up some good example work to share their experience and learnings with the other countries. And then later on to support the guideline preparation. So that could be a very good in sharing and learning progress. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think we are almost out of time. I've just got one last point. I wanted to ask you, if I asked the panelists if I gave you a single magic wish as to something that could be instantly granted to transform ICH for the future, what would it be? Dr. Nakashima?
So I like to talk about the dream. So I believe the key for the success is mutual confidence and trust among the members and observers, regulators, and industries. I think that expert networks are quite important. In the future, I would like to make a platform to exchange experts among members to make the close network of experts. I hope that experts converge to agree on a common direction for the emerging technologies.
Thank you for sharing your dream. I think we are now out of time, so I'm going to have to end it there. I would like to thank you all for your excellent collaboration. I think we're heading into a break. I'm hand back to Julie.
Thank you very much, Judith, and to all our panelists, speakers, and all the audience for your engagement with the Q&A. So that ends part one of today's session. We will take a short break now, and we will be back in just under 15 minutes, where we will take a deeper dive into some of the clinical topics. You will see on the screen that there will be a poll during the break, and this poll will ask a very relevant question that has come up quite a lot already today regarding training. So I would encourage you, as you take your break, to take a few moments to respond to this poll, which will be visible during the break. So see you all soon. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed a good break. So before we started the break, we asked you if you could kindly provide a response to a poll we're very interested in regarding training. So visible on your screen now, there is a link to this poll similar to the first poll we ran, and also a QR code. So either of these will work. And you know, this question is a simple yes, no, or unsure answer regarding training awareness. So I think this was a topic that came up substantially during the Q&A and also during the panel discussion. So hopefully you can scan in the QR code and answer the question, and we'll see if we have some results that may be of interest. Okay, this is our first poll here from earlier today. And then hopefully we will see the results of the next poll. Okay, so perhaps we can, so this appears to be running the poll around key factors impeding the full benefits of applying ICH guidelines in Asia. So while we have this poll up here, we would really encourage you to provide your answers. And some of these are areas that came up during the panel discussion and during the Q&A also. So we can see interpretation of guidelines is a key factor. Resource constraints of regulatory authorities also coming out strongly. It's actually quite even across each of the 5 parameters. So I still see some responses coming through. So if you haven't had a chance yet, please scan in the QR code and provide your response. Quite evenly spread out. That is very interesting. Thank you all so much for your responses. Still a few more coming through, so we'll leave it up there for another 15 or 20 seconds to give people an opportunity to return and to answer this question. Great, so it's interesting, it's quite an even spread, perhaps interpretation coming out more strongly than the others. Okay, so thank you very much. And with this in mind, I would just like to introduce the second half of today's session. And we are going to focus on efficacy guidelines for the next hour. So it is now really my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Yuki Ando from PMDA. Dr. Ando is going to present to us today on how the clinical guidelines link together and what the challenges may be on that. Over to you, Dr. Ando.
Thank you for your kind introduction. So today, I'd like to give an overview of some of the ICH efficacy guidance and the relationship between them in the context of the recent clinical development environment. Next slide, please. On the right side of the slide is a list of the ICHE topics for which guidelines have been issued and are currently being considered by the expert working group. The ICHE 8R1, General Principles of Clinical Studies, says that the ICH efficacy guidelines are an integrated set of guidance covering the planning, design, and the conduct, safety and analysis, and the reporting of the clinical studies. They should be considered and used in an integrated and holistic way rather than focusing on only one guideline or subsections. So recently considered and adapted guidelines are closely related to the recent discussion on the efficiency of the drug development. Maybe you know the new type of the clinical study design or data sources. So understanding of the contents and the relationships among these guidance will directly lead to the efficient drug development and faster delivery of drugs to patients. Next slide, please. The revision of E8 and E6 has been based on the discussion of GCP renovation. The trigger of the discussion of GCP renovation was the comments from the International Academic Institute and the consortium as a public comment on E6R2. So with consideration of these comments, the ICH reflection on GCP renovation was issued in January 2017. In the reflection paper, revision of the ICH E8 to address broader concern about the principles of study design and planning for an appropriate level of the data quality, and the renovation of the ICH E6 GCP to address flexibility concerns with respect to a broader range of study types and data sources are announced, and they are being addressed sequentially. The next slide, please. I will briefly explain the E8R1 and the E6. So E8R1 is a guideline of general consideration for clinical trial, clinical studies. And original E8 was adopted in 1997. So this is a relatively old guidance document. Then, as you know, the clinical trial design and conduct have become more complex and compared to those days, so before the 2000. So a wide range of trial designs and the data sources were not covered in the E8, original E8, and also, surprisingly, issues of trial quality were not implicitly stated in the original E8 guideline. So E8 was revised to describe internationally accepted principles and practices in the design and the conduct of clinical studies, also to provide guidance on the consideration of quality in the design and the conduct of clinical studies, and to provide an overview of the types of clinical studies. E8 also has the role of guide to other ICH E documents. The introduction of the concept of study quality, particularly fit for purpose quality and critical to quality factors, E8R1 will serve as a kind of yardstick for the use of the data sources other than clinical studies with respect to the study and the data quality and the strength of the evidence. Next slide, please. The table of contents for E8R1 is listed on the left side of this slide. The new contents of Chapter 3 and Chapter 7, such as designing quality into clinical studies and critical to quality factors, and the inclusion of data sources in Chapter 5 are particularly new. The annex, types of clinical studies, was also being substantially updated. So the right side of this slide shows an excerpt of the types of clinical studies with only study examples that are exploratory and confirmatory, respectively. So as you can see, the adaptive design and the study design to demonstrate efficacy for multiple drugs in a single protocol, which is known as the master protocol design, are included as example in this E8R1. So in addition, of course, the purpose of the studies and the study examples for post-marketing have also been updated in this annex. So I encourage you to check the entire table. Next slide, please. So I will talk a little bit about the E6. So the original E6 was adopted in 1996, and the renovation of the E6 is still ongoing. So the document of the draft principles was issued in 2021. The E6R1 is planned to consist of the 3 parts. So the first one is overarching principles and objectives. And GCP, good clinical practice for interventional clinical trials as Annex 1. And the consideration for non-traditional interventional clinical trial not addressed in the Annex 1 as Annex 2. So consideration on real-world data type of data will be included in the Annex 2. So EWG is now working on the principles and the Annex 1. So we'd like to wait for the release of the draft document and the public consultation. Next slide, please. The ICH E9 is a guidance for statistical principles for clinical trials and originally adopted in 1998. So this guideline is intended to give direction to sponsors in the design and conduct, analysis, and evaluation of clinical trials of an investigational product in the context of its overall clinical development. So the table of contents of the guideline is shown on the right side of this slide. As you can see, this guideline is not a guideline on statistical analysis, but the guideline includes clinical development, the trial planning, and conduct. So since it focuses on the statistical principles and it does not refer to a particular method, such as the name of the test or estimation, the original E9 can be applied to clinical trials even now. And also in this guidance document, it didn't limit the discussion to the statistical test. So it includes the future method that is not included in this guidance document. Then in 2019, addendum of E9, which is numbered E9R1, was adopted. The subject of this addendum is introducing the concept of estimand, what is to be estimated in the trial, which means a precise description of the trial treatment effect reflecting the clinical questions posed by the trial objectives. So we should have a detailed description of treatment, population, variables, or endpoint, and potential intercurrent events such as treatment discontinuation and population level summary, basically at the design stage of the trial. The addendum also introduced a framework, the which is structured framework to link trial objectives to suitable trial design and tools for estimation and hypothetical testing. The basic concept may sound obvious, but I believe this principle will become more important in the future as the data we deal with become more complex. So having clarity in the estimand and the method for estimation give a basis for planning which data needs to be collected, and the concept of missing data will align with the estimand. So although the addendum basically focuses on the randomized control trials, but we may use external control, which is not randomized for the comparison. So we will think about what is to be estimated in such cases. Next slide, please. E17 is a guideline of general principles for planning and the design of MRCT and adopted in 2017. I think you know this guideline well. and I just list the key points from the basic principles in the guideline. So we think that also for more complex trials and various data sources, if the data are collected from the more than one region, we should refer ICH E5, the guideline on the ethnic factors, and this E17 guideline. There may be more variation of drug development program, strategic use of MRCTs for efficient drug development should be focused. The guideline explains the importance of identifying and collecting information on intrinsic and extrinsic factors, and they should be taken into account throughout the development and the optimal development program for the drug and for each region. So it should be recognized that this guideline is not intended only to set sample size for each region or to pool the regions or population. This is the guideline for the drug development. Next slide, please. This slide shows the example of the relationship between the four guidelines I presented today. So as I previously mentioned, E8 is a so-called overarching guideline and is related to all ICH efficacy guidelines. So regarding the relationship to E9, so there are a lot of references to E9 and E9R1 from the E8, especially in chapter 5, design elements and data sources for clinical trials, as you can imagine. And the relationship of the E8 to E6, based on the GCP renovation concept, E6R3, the current revision, will be aligned with the principles in E8R1, such as designing quality into clinical trials, stakeholder engagement, trial design, proportionate trial management, and focus on factors critical to quality of trial. So with respect to E17, ethnic factors are considered as factors that have impact on the outcome of the clinical study. And regarding complex clinical trial design and various data sources, the contents described in E5 and E17 will need to be considered. So whatever need to be considered, whatever the data comes from more than one region, as I previously mentioned. And E17 guideline explains the importance of ensuring high quality of the study data and conducting accordance with E6 in all regions. Next slide, please. This is my first final slide. The drug approval basically requires the accumulation of the certain evidence of efficacy and safety based on the series of clinical studies in the drug development program. To accumulate the evidence, as you know, the diversity of data sources, study designs, and the selection of regions from which data are obtained is increasing. So optimization of the development program based on the information available and the various tools such as study design, data sources, and MRCTs, and updating the program based on the study results and other information will be critical. And it should be noted that there is also a diverse of the increase of aspect that needs to be considered during the design phase of the study. So we should keep in mind that many guidelines emphasize that importance of consideration in planning phase. And because study design will be complicated and various data sources may be actively used in the future, open dialogue and sharing experience among stakeholders will be important, particularly for the use of study design and data sources that have less experiences, and designing quality into the study and consideration of estimate for complex and innovative study design, and information of intrinsic and extrinsic factors in each disease areas for efficient use of MRCT. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ando. Very interesting perspective on the interlinkages between the different E-guidelines, and I would fully agree with you on the role of dialogue and engagement on this area. Thank you very much. So now I'm actually going to bring up the poll that we had intended to do during the break. We had a few technical issues with that. So there we go. You'll see on your screen a QR code and also a web link. So this question is really asking you, about the level of awareness that you have around the ICH trainings that are available. And this was obviously something that came up very strongly during the Q&A and during the panel discussion. So if you would like to take a moment to scan in the QR code or go to the web link and provide your answer there. It's very simple, yes, no, or don't know. And we'll see what kind of an answer we get. So are you well informed of ICH training opportunities? For example, the ICH website or recognized training programs or other. So this is very interesting. So we have the majority of answers at this point saying no, which I think tells us there is some work perhaps to do there around awareness of training opportunities. The polling seems to be settling down. I'll just leave it another maybe 15 to 20 seconds, see if we can encourage any other audience members to participate in the poll. The more, the better. So there we definitely have a clear answer here. The majority of you are telling us that you are not well informed about ICH training opportunities. So I think that is going to be a key takeaway, perhaps from today's session. Just one or two more answers coming through. So we'll just leave it another maybe 10 seconds, please. Very interesting. Okay, I think we can close the poll now. That's giving us a very clear answer. Thank you very much. And thank you for your patience as we worked through those technical issues. So, as I said, thank you to Dr. Ando for her presentation. And now I would like to introduce Annette Helmsmark from Novo Nordisk, representing EFPIA. And Annette is going to give us the industry perspective on ICH E17. Over to you, Annette.
Thank you, Julie. I hope you can all hear me and that the sound is clear. So thank you very much. I'm happy to be here to talk about ICH E17 from industry perspective. And I work at Novo Nordisk in Copenhagen in Denmark, but today I'm actually representing EFPIA and the EFPIA ICH E17 task force. And what I'll do is I'll introduce what we are doing, the initiatives we've been taking in order to support the implementation of the ICH guideline. And I'll do that based on industry perspective, of course. So back in 2020, the International Regulatory Expert Group in EFPIA, IREG, decided to establish a task force specifically to look at the ICH E17 guideline. And the reason for that was that we wanted to see how we were doing on the implementation and how we could support the implementation going forward. As part of this work, we actually conducted a survey back in September 2020 that focused on identifying if there were any barriers to accepting the ICH E17 guideline in certain countries, in 7 countries, and also to, based on the output of that, to see whether there was anything we should do or specifically focus on with regards to advocacy and training activities to support the guideline implementation. So that's a bit too quick. So the survey in 2020 actually showed that there is a need to generate further evidence with regards to actual use of the guideline and case studies in relation to that. And the task force is now in the process. Actually, we just distributed a survey, a second survey, which I'll get back to in the next coming slides. But next slide, please. So, but before going into the second survey that we are conducting, I just want to emphasize that there's no doubt that from the industry perspective, there are a potential for certain benefits in relation to the ICH 17. Of course, it requires that the overall potential is that we see that it can provide a more efficient development program that can cover more regions, and in that sense also ensure that we get to patients globally earlier, closing a treatment gap. And of course, that prerequisites that we have efficient use of resources and so on, and that takes us into the issue around this ICH guideline, and that is that we need to plan really carefully in order to do that, because we also need to, if we wish to do a more efficient development program, for example, obviating the need for standalone studies in individual countries, it really does prerequisite that we have looked into the ethnic factors described in ICH 5, and also mentioned by the previous speaker, Yogi Ando from PMDA. So that's just to say that, but we also see some hurdles in relation to fully implementing the guideline, and that is also issues which have been mentioned. So I'll just briefly mention them here. The issue of local legislation or regulation that actually can prevent regulators in a country to actually fully implement the guideline principles. And then another aspect also mentioned several times is about the awareness of the guideline and the understanding of it, and that goes both for regulators and industry. And then there are some operational and logistical considerations as well. Next slide, please. So what we've done in the FPR ICH 17 task force, E17 task force, is to take the next step to generate evidence and case studies. I mean, there's currently a lack of published case studies where companies have used the ICH 17 principles for planning and designing the MSRTs, and that really makes it difficult to assess the current level of practical implementation and acceptance also by the regulatory authorities of the principle outlined in the guideline. So the second survey is aiming to generate the latest evidence via the FPM member companies, and the purpose is to get an updated status on how the guideline is used by the industry, and also to use that information as a basis for the next steps, hopefully including a mutual beneficial dialogue with regulators around the findings. And I also want to emphasize, and that's important, that the survey is not intended to duplicate any of the other efforts with ongoing implementation surveys, for example, the ones conducted by ICH. It's meant to be complementary. Next slide, please. So I'm sure that we can all agree in this virtual room that that this is about setting up a global development program that can cover all regions and countries are actually easier said than done. If you want to do it in like a simultaneous go without having, delay in any countries. The results from the FPIA 2020 survey, as well as the CIRS ICH survey that was also mentioned by the previous speaker, from 2020 indicate that there's still a lot of room for improvement, it really does take careful and early planning to be successful, and also applying the pooling principles, which have been a very big focus area for the industry so far. It really means that you need to work, use the principles of the ICH E5 as well. So we want to get a clear perspective on how companies are doing that. Next slide, please. So this slide is really just to provide a graphical representation of a global development activity overview across the various stages of development, and to emphasize the importance of the first early steps in this process. And that's the steps where you as a company need to really consider the ethnic factors, the intrinsic and extrinsic factors for your drug. And you need to collect all the necessary information that you can find already. And if you can't find the needed information, you also have to consider how you can generate that information. And that's actually the only way that you successfully can apply also some of the beneficial activities and principles in the ICH 17 guideline around ethnicity issues and pooling of the data across various countries and regions. I also want to iterate that this also really prerequisites authority interactions, and this is a plea to the authority representatives on the call that this is really also where we need to have a good dialogue and a possibility to interact with the authorities in a timely fashion and have good and science-based discussions around our programs. By that, next slide, please. I just want to thank you for your attention, and I want to acknowledge the rest of the ICH 17 task force members listed here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annette, for that excellent presentation. And I would just at this point like to encourage the audience to provide any questions you may have into the Q&A. And with that, I will hand over to Angelika Juice from MSD representing IFPMA, who is going to chair a panel discussion on the presentations and related issues that we have just heard. Over to you, Angelika.
Thank you very much, Julie, and hello to everyone. I'm really delighted to be moderating the panel 2 of today's session. My name is Angelika Joost, and I'm delighted to be representing IFPMA on the Management Committee and the Assembly together with Julie McDonald. I'm delighted to be joined here by the speakers on the panel, but also by Sally Zhang, who is actually one of the IFPMA representatives on the E6 Good Clinical Practice Guideline Expert Working Group. And so I'm actually giving the floor first to Sally to give us a bit of insights, what it looks like from the inside when you're actually sitting at the table of an expert working group, and her experience she has now that she is part of these discussions. Sally, over to you.
Thank you, Angelika, for your question and also the IFPMA's invitation to this great conference. So I think first of all, it has been really, I think, a great honor and experience for me to representing IFPMA and RDPAC China, working in the ICH Global Expert Working Group since 3 years ago. So especially as we all know that E6 is a high-profile guidance and is a main ICH guidance for clinical trial conduction. And when it comes to my experience, and as you probably know that our global E6 expert working group mainly consists of the representatives from the regulatory authorities, the industry associations, and we also invite actually the investigators from US, Europe, Japan, China, etc., to join the discussion for the relevant topics as important part of stakeholder engagement. And also the patient organization, as you just heard, I think from the Dr. Nakashima-san. So he actually shared this part as well. So the EWG that I'm working in also had very close communications with E8 working group and other working group like safety and other e-guidance as needed, as these guidance have really quite some interdependencies, as Dr. Yuki-san just shared in her presentation. And our way of working mainly included the EWG, the global meetings. For example, we have the biannually hybrid virtual meeting, the weekly meetings most time, and the small group meetings that we will focus on the content drafting. So we call it the small drafting group, as well as the stakeholder engagement meetings, etc. So my personal experience, I think the working group is very well organized, and we set very clear timeline and a revision plan. And also the expert, I think, from different countries shared the local experience and insight about the revisions. So we are working, I'm feeling that we're really working in a very open-minded way. And the regulatory chair, who I think who is from the US FDA, is very, very inclusive to encourage all the representative, all the experts, to input. And we do also have some very, some constructive debates. So many of our discussions, either discussions or debates, I think on revision were around, one of the main objectives of the E6 is how to really provide the flexibility, reduce burden, meanwhile to ensure that the trial data quality is sufficient to support the review of clinical trials. And we also, discuss a lot about really how to reflect these considerations in the wording of the revision. So I think it's very meaningful by doing this way to the industry, society, and patients to make our ecosystem, more sustainable with the new technology and the faster pace of the science development, as the chair, mentioned earlier. So I also obtained very good support from IFPMA, RDPEC, and ICH coordination, for the meeting schedules, feedbacks, etc. So I think it's really a great experience for me as industry representative to learn and also to contribute. So yeah, I hope I answer your first question.
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's very insightful also when you point out that the E6 actually does this very innovative way, involving actually patients, or making sure that patients have a line of sight of what is being discussed in this very important guidance, as well as the academic sector, who also is a very big user community, basically, of the guidances that come out there. That was very interesting. Maybe I can ask you also a question, since we having had the pandemic virtual working environment for quite a while now. Do you think that this has had any impact, or how has it been working with the virtual working on the ICH working groups?
That's a very good question. We actually got the survey also from ICH, the organizer for the meeting, to collect the feedback from the EWG members about their reflections or their feedback on the hybrid approach or virtual approach. So overall, I think what I heard that from other members as well, I think it works very well. And recently, I think in the September, we have Amsterdam hybrid virtual meeting as well. And some expert members, went to the Amsterdam EMA office physically in person, so they have in-person meeting, and some members we joined remotely. So, and I think ICH provided very good facility so that we hear each other very well. And although we couldn't have the eye contact in person, but still I think from the videos, etc., I think it works very well. But do look forward to, the future after pandemic and all these restrictions that, we can have more in-person interactions. That should, also greatly help with the communication and discussion.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to hear that the hybrid working has actually worked for the past years. Maybe turning over to Dr. Ando, I think we have heard a lot about the multi-regional clinical trials guideline, the E17 from Annette has presented that. You have been helping this implementation of that guideline in the PMDA. Can you tell us what PMDA has been doing to facilitate the local implementation efforts in that sense? And do you have any recommendations, perhaps even for other countries, how this could be done based on your experience?
Okay, thank you for your question. The PMDA formed a working group on the MRCT as one of the projects across multi-offices in the PMDA. So in the working group, we have active discussion and information sharing between all new drug review offices and other offices in the PMDA. In addition, the working group meets regularly with a similar group in the industry representatives such as the JPNA to discuss the issues about the MRCT. As a result of such discussion, so we had workshops, several workshops to provide information or examples and Q&As to industry participants. So we believe that this type of the activity is very important, as we have experienced that there were, points where, regulators and industry groups have the different views on the guidelines. So we'd like to keep the alignment of the interpretation of the guidance. So such dialogue is very important. Thank you.
Yes, I fully agree. I think this is a great opportunity to have more dialogue between regulators and industry at the local level, perhaps also at the regional level, just to ensure that there is a common understanding. And sometimes, the devil always lies in the details, and sometimes even language barriers or translation may be an issue, just to make sure that everybody understands and interprets it in the same way. So if I ask you, is there one action that you would suggest a regulator could do in a role as a regulator to progress the E17 implementation? Is there anything you would think of?
Yeah, in short, I like to people to read the guidance as guideline for the drug development or drug development principle programs. So for example, in our experience, so some people have the belief that the E17 guideline is the guideline for the introducing just a pooling strategy to the development program. Now, we believe that the E17 guideline is guideline on the importance of gathering the information about the ethnic factors and the best plan based on such information and evaluation of the results from the scientific viewpoint. So it also takes into account the uncertainty of such information, particularly in the early phase, and also during the drug development. So so I'd like people to read the guideline.
That is a good suggestion.
From the perspective. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Annette, from an industry perspective, what would be your recommendation? What could industry do better to do progress on the E17 implementation?
I must admit, based on our survey in 2020 and so, and also the free text field and in the CIS survey and so on, it does stand out that we as industry also have a role to play. And I want to bridge to Yuki Ando's statement that it takes two to tango, kind of. You need to do your planning as a company for drug development programs so that you take early in the development phase, take the extrinsic and intrinsic factors into account and also develop the needed data to be able to argue for a pooling strategy if that's what you pursue. I mean, you need to have the scientific evidence, but of course that also requires that the regulators, because there are various regulators and PMDA has done a lot to implement the guideline and have discussions and so on, and that's really appreciated. But it also does take an effort from the regulators to enable the interaction between companies and the regulators in a flexible is probably a wrong word to use, but a timely manner so that we have an ability to have, once we have the questions, once we have the overview, we can interact. And I also saw there was a question in the chat around this to me actually, and what should regulators do to do that? And I think it's first of all, ensure that you have a setup for scientific advice and communication with companies so that we have the ability to formally have the dialogue around our development programs. I would say that that's the first step. And then of course, you also need to assign the resource to do that, both from company side, take the time to interact with regulators, and the regulators need to assign the resource and capacity to and competencies to interact with the companies as well. A bit long, sorry.
Okay, thank you, Annette. So if we basically thinking about sorting all out these design questions and then a company basically designing a global multi-regional clinical trial, do you think it's possible, or do you think there's any implementation issues that are arising if different regions having different processes and timelines for actually approving clinical trial applications?
Yeah.
Any views?
I mean, there's no doubt that doing a truly global program does entail a lot of challenges, also logistics and timely challenges, because you need to ensure that you get all the necessary input from regulators around the world. You need to ensure that you can start up the clinical trial programs in the same time across countries and so on. And you touch upon the issue around getting clinical trials approved before starting them up. That can be very variable from region to region and country to country, how fast that goes. And there can also be other barriers that's not necessarily related directly to the regulator review and approval of the CTA. So, I mean, it's not a secret that we see that in China. I work a lot with China, and not to spell anybody out, but it is, it needs to be aligned as well if we should do the full development package in the same time across the countries. And that's the reason why it's good to have ICH, and that a lot of countries have joined ICH. I really see that as a good stepping stone.
Yeah, thanks, Annette. Specifically pointing out that China has made such a big progress and actually accelerated clinical trial approvals so much. I don't know, Sally, if you have any perspective, since you're, I assume, working also a lot with China.
Yes, thank you, Angelica. And also thank you for pointing out, Annette, for the renovations, I think, in China. I think it has been well really recognized in the past, especially 5 years after China joined ICH, in 2015. So the CDE actually, from an NMPA perspective, they actually adopt quite some measures really to promote ICH and also to develop the new guidance from CDE perspective and to support the implementation of ICH guidance in China. So from those numbers, we really can see that. And also we can see that from what Xiaoti from our industry association, she also just presented about the number of the clinical trials, the innovative clinical trials that CDE have been, approved, reviewed, and approved in the past years. I think it's a significant increase from that regards. I think for China, the challenge I think is the same right now in terms of ICH guidance implementation is the local legal framework in some extent. I think it's quite similar to other countries as well. So because each country, their health system is different. Their setting for the framework, data sharing, etc. There's different aspect as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sally. I think Yuki has shown us the relationship between all these series of guidelines, which may not be actually obvious to everyone. So do you think it would be nice to have a kind of more, I don't know, guide or roadmap to actually show that? I know that Yuki showed us this nice slide, how the guidances are interdependent. Would that help the developers?
Thank you for the question. Yes, and actually, original plan of the E8R1, we had the plan of having some, tables to show the relationship between the E guidance and the E8, but that was deleted at the final stage because it was really, difficult to show all the relationship between the guidelines. But maybe we should focus on some part of such relationship when talking about some topics like a trial quality, or maybe in the near future, maybe the dose response or something like that. So for such a discussion point, we can show the relationship between the ICHE guidance document. And I also recommend sometimes you see the all the list of the guidance documents. So and maybe we should update some of the guidance document, but sometimes we have some hint in several guidance. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's good perhaps to bring that back into the training discussion, a training environment, and actually training people regarding the relationships of all these guidances, because it may not be that obvious bringing it back. Maybe we can use the last few minutes also to reflect back a bit on the poll that we have had in the break. Where we basically looked at what are the main challenges for implementation. And so if I remember correctly, it was the kind of interpretation, the different interpretation of regulators on the ICH guideline that was perceived as being the biggest hurdle for implementing guidances. Would you have any reflections, or would you agree with this notion, or what would be your perspective? Bringing it back. Thank you, IFPMA.
Yeah,
maybe Annette?
I'll be happy to start if you want me to, Angelica.
Yes, please, Annette.
So this about the interpretation of guidelines for local and regional regulatory authorities. That's also something we're seeing in the FPS survey that we did back in 2020. I mean, I think, first of all, we have to, of course, also understand that the regulators, they need to, it's a process to implement ICH guidelines. So you can't expect that from one day to another, everything has been changed in a country's legislation. But I think what I would urge the regulators, also in the Asian region, to do is to look further into also a cross collaboration on how you can eventually move around these local legislation that you may have in place to protect your local population. I mean, it's fair to say that's your role as regulator to do that. But on the other hand, we have a really good guideline that could really facilitate, closing the treatment gap among populations and in countries we have not been early to develop in before and so on. So I think there's an opportunity here to look further into both how the local requirements can be removed eventually, but also how we can use the thinking behind, some of the thinking behind the ICH 17 is also the pooling strategies, even though it cannot stand alone without scientific data, as I said before. So it's important to ensure that if we really come with scientific data, that we don't have to redo studies in all the countries, even though, because then it's a collaboration, I would say. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I think you're pointing out that harmonizing to international standards and international guidance is really a very beneficial activity for each country. And I think linking it back to session 1 as well, we have seen also from Shouty from FIRDA that this actually has enabled also the Chinese biopharmaceutical industry to do more research out at a global level and basically accelerating their activities. So it is beneficial also for each country.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we only have a few minutes left. So I will do a final question to all of you. So please, what would you think is one thing that either regulators or industry or the ICH organization could be doing to ensure that we have the ICH series of guidelines continuing to be successful drivers of global clinical development? What would be your suggestion? Let me start with Yuki.
Yeah, thank you for the question. My answer is related to the previous question, but maybe we should, we should discuss or we should present the, the actual meaning or interpretation of such guidance document. For example, the EWG members have the more background information about the establishing such guidelines, and maybe maybe this is one of the reasons of the misunderstanding of the guidance document, but it's really difficult to read between the lines of the guidance document. So guidance document should be the principal type of the document. So but it actually includes more information. So maybe we should share such information based on the examples and so such information sharing is really important.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Sally, what would you say?
Yeah, I just wanted to end for UK's comment, and I totally agree. I think to the question also for the survey result we just had, I think be able to understand why is so critical, for the correct and consistent interpretation, among regulatory agencies and also the other parties as well. So I think I also agree that we EWG members played an important role on that as well, to be able to share with others. Thank you. I noticed about time.
Yeah, thank you very much for all your perspectives and the great discussion. Thank you very much for the participation. I'm handing it back to our chair, Julie, for closing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angelica, and thank you to all our panelists and presenters for an excellent second half to today's session. So I think we're almost at the end of day 4 of the Asia Regulatory Conference, and I just wanted to briefly touch on a couple of the kind of key messages from today's sessions. I think, you know, one very key theme that came out, particularly in the first half of today, was around, you know, expansion of ICH, collaboration, and particularly training. So as we see ICH continuing to grow and expand, I think the role of training, you know, more awareness around training, effectiveness of training, and collaboration with multiple stakeholders are going to become more and more important to ensure future success of ICH. I feel another key theme that came out today, and this was particularly strong in the Q&A from our audience, and thank you to the audience for your engagement, was around the area of guideline implementation. So obviously this is really essential, and there is a link to the point around training. And we have seen very good progress as demonstrated by Dr. Jiwang and Dr. Ando and others today. We have seen great progress to implement ICH guidelines in Asia, but there is more work to be done. Lastly, I think, you know, focusing on the efficacy guidelines, you know, some of the key messages from the last hour, I think, is that, as Dr. Ando pointed out, it's very important that this suite of guidelines are considered in an integrated and holistic way, and the interconnections between them are fully understood. And then I also felt one of the key themes is, you know, aligning the expectations between industry and regulators, for example, on E17, is very important. And dialogue in that regard, such as we're having today, is really critical. So this concludes day 4 of the ARC. Just once again, I would like to say thank you to all our speakers for their fantastic presentations, and for our panelists and chairs and you, the audience, for your excellent engagement and discussion. On behalf of IFPMA, thank you, and you know, I really do look forward to advancing these discussions over the coming months and years. With that, I just want to say, as you can see on the screen, you know, we do hope that you will join the Asia Regulatory Conference again tomorrow for day 5, where the focus will be on biotherapeutics and advanced therapy medicinal products. It promises to be a very interesting and engaging day, and I do hope you will join us then. So with that, I will close today's session. Thank you all very much.